option. Okay. So I will, after today's session, I'm going to share this recording with you. So you'll have access to the replay and you'll have access to the slides. So I'll send those to you as well. And there are a couple of tools that I'm going to share with you today. I'll attach those to the emails that I send as a follow-up today. So you'll have everything from this session available to you after probably about, be with you about 4 o'clock, something like that. It takes a couple of hours for things to process this end and get it all ready. So, what is today's topic? We're going to be talking today about negotiating, and in particular, negotiating so that we get a win-win outcome for you and for clients or customers that you are dealing with. And the whole idea of negotiations, if you haven't considered negotiations before, if you haven't had training on negotiation, it's quite interesting. I have a lot of experience of this. Some of those experiences are really positive. Some of those experiences are things that I learned along the way that tripped me up at the time. So I'm going to share some of those thoughts with you today. And I run these sessions. So once a month, I will run a sales session and I'll also run a leadership session. So do that once a month for clients. So some people on the call are clients of mine. Other people are in my professional network. So it's more of an open session, gives a chance to get more people involved. And through those wider groups, there tends to be a bit more interaction, a bit more going on. So I kind of like to open these sessions once a month. I open these sessions up. But the idea is that these are thinking time sessions. So it's an opportunity to press the pause button on all the busyness and the activity that's going on in your business and just create some time to think, because that's very rare nowadays. We've got so much going on. There's so many, it's distractions and interactions and messages and stuff coming at us that thinking time is pretty rare and precious. So this is 1 hour of thinking time for us all to just kind of reflect on what we want to do and change. And the things that I'm going to talk about today are when we talk about negotiating for a win-win, we're going to look at the customer journey and the sales process. Now, if you've been on a call with me before and seen that again, today it's about understanding from that perspective of the customer journey, where does negotiation really fit? And then kind of knowing when to negotiate, thinking about what decisions customers are making, and then really thinking about as we go through that negotiating phase, what are some of the customer's needs and motivations, and what could we be doing to better manage ourselves through that negotiating process? And there's a number of principles I'm going to share with you today that hopefully just get you thinking differently about the opportunities for negotiating now and in the future. And then I run a sales training program. There are a few people on today's call who are in that sales training program. It's a monthly kind of mastermind that we run. I'll just share a bit about that with you at the end. Then we'll take Q&A and we will wrap up and finish. And the idea with these sessions is always to try and aim to finish at around 5 to the hour so that you get a 5-minute window before your 2 o'clock starts, because most people will have a 2 o'clock meeting that they've got to get to. So I want to try and give you a window before that 2 o'clock. So let's make a start. For those of you for whom this is the first call, you perhaps don't know as much about me and my experience, because very often, if I'm talking to a new audience, first thing that I get is, well, what's your experience, what's your background, and what people are really saying is, who are you to tell me what to do, right? And that's a fair challenge. So my background is in sales from 1993. Sounds like a long time because it is 32 years ago. So I remember having a Rolodex, building out my report cards, having a BT call card and making phone calls from a phone box because mobile phones weren't really prevalent in use. And I kind of learned the hard way how to sell. And I did a lot of door knocking, a lot of cold calling. And it actually was really good groundwork. I didn't think at the time, looking back, it was really good sales education. But I was in sales for a couple of years before I first then went to a bigger company and then got sales training. And then I had this career in sales management, business leadership, and then eventually, running big businesses for large corporate American companies. And then in the last 8 years, I decided I'd get out of the corporate world, set up my own consultancy, and start teaching people what I'd learned throughout the years. And it's surprising what you realize as you go through that kind of consulting and coaching process. And so what I learned over the years, personally and with clients I work with, is that it's really easy for us to get into inconsistencies and for negativity to seep in without us even realizing it. And actually, a lot of the time, what people need is just to go back to some of the foundations. How do I get myself re-engaged? How do I start to look at the way that I'm performing and start to be more consistent with that performance and systemize it? And once you get those things in place, that's when growth occurs. And sometimes we focus on, how do we get the business growing, but we don't go back to some of those fundamentals. And that's really what I tend to work on with clients. And I've had a bit of recognition along the way, which I won't talk about. One of the things I'm really proud of is I've written a couple of books. The one we'll talk about a bit today is the Inspire, Influence, Sell book. A lot of what we'll cover today comes from that book. There's lots of things you can do to negotiate. And negotiating is just one phase, of course, of the sales process. But that's what we'll look at. And I'll kind of point you towards the book towards the end as well. So let's talk about the content. So customer journey, I really like to think about the sales from the customer's perspective, because if we don't really tune into the customer, we miss that relevance and the value that we have to create. So let's talk a bit about the customer journey and how sales aligns with it. First thing to remember when we're in sales is that we normally think about the sales funnel as being, optimal like this, wider at the top, narrower at the bottom, and we make this assumption that gravity acts with us through the sales process. And if any of you have been in sales for a while, you know that is almost counterintuitive. It's exactly the opposite of what happens in sales. When we're in sales, gravity acts against us. If we don't have control, if we don't follow up, if we don't make things really compelling and engaging for a customer, then actually they lose interest or they slip out of the funnel. So I always have this principle where I invert the funnel, because it reminds us that our job is to draw customers up through that funnel and against gravity that's acting naturally against us. So first step of the process is that the customer starts their journey with us kind of unaware of the value we can create. And our job is to make sure that we're well prepared, to have all the right assets in place, to have the key messages, to think like the customer, to have a plan that is market-centric, to have all of the information we need so that we can start to seed messages that really land with the customer. And when we seed the right messages to the customer, we get them attentive. Okay, so first step in the customer journey is, okay, you've got my attention. Getting attention is quite straightforward. Once we've got someone's attention, then what we have to do is start to share relevant insights. Information with that customer that gets them to think beyond just the early messaging and start to think, okay, this is something that is really relevant and could be an opportunity for my business. Okay. And when the customer goes to that stage, they become interested. Okay. So attention and interest, quite straightforward. To get someone's attention, to get them interested, that's straightforward. What happens then is critical, because for most salespeople, they mistake interest for the next stage, which we won't talk about yet. But when they get an interested customer, they start to pitch. And when you've got a customer that's interested and you pitch at them, they go from interested to uninterested very, very quickly. What we have to do when a customer is interested is pivot and ask them about what they need and what they're experiencing right now. So ask them questions, listen carefully, and have a structured approach to asking the right questions, because we want the customer to become problem aware that there's a problem they want to fix. Once we've asked those questions, we've listened carefully, the customer tells us what they're trying to do, they naturally invoke in themselves a desire to change. And that's why the needs discovery stage is so important, because the customer has this internal narrative where, as they're explaining to you what they're experiencing, they're also convincing themselves that something needs to change. And sometimes they come to that realization just through the questions you ask. And of course, when the customer goes through that process in their own mind, they have this desire to change, then they'll say something to you like, so how can you help? Because then they want you to tell them about a solution. And it's at that point when you should start to say, okay, would it be okay if I talk to you about how I think we can help you solve that problem? And then, of course, the customer is super receptive. And when they're receptive to the solution and you're able to demonstrate it in a way that is optimal, so you talk about features, advantages, and benefits, not just we've got this funky tech or this fantastic product. You talk about how that delivers for the customer. Then you're able to get the customer to say, okay, I'd like to do something. They want to take action. And when a customer is prepared to take action, that's when you make a proposal. So you say, here's how it works. Here's the pricing or the investment. Here is the kind of stages of deployment or development or whatever it is that you're doing. And the customer is then receptive to want to do something. And then the final bit, in order to get the customer to go from an intent to take action to actually place an order and become a customer, because that sounds like it's the same thing, but it isn't, right? We know it isn't. The final thing we have to do is create a sense of immediacy and urgency. And the final step of our sales process is immediate action. And then, of course, long term, we want clients to be people that want to refer us, that want to be loyal to us. And we do that through a process of review and reflection, asking for feedback, making sure that we're adjusting and acting on that feedback and reflecting on our own approach and how well we're operating and where we need to improve and develop. And that's the sales, that's the journey that the customer goes through, the sales process that we go through to make sure that we take the customer, guide the customer through all of those phases. And of course, negotiation happens here. Traditionally, negotiation happens at the proposal stage or that between that and when we're finalizing next steps and what we're going to do. That's where we normally negotiate. But of course, if we follow a process, a sales process that's like this, at the point when we negotiate, we have the highest leverage. And we have the highest leverage because the customer wants to take action. And the biggest mistake I see people make is that they negotiate either at the wrong stage or they haven't seeded ideas through these first four steps of the process before they start to negotiate. And we'll talk a bit about how you can do that in today's session. So that's really important context for how and when we should be negotiating. And you'll see that was a linear process. I like to think of sales as a cycle or a series of cycles because very rare that we'll close a deal in the first interaction. So we think about going through a cycle of selling every single time we meet with a customer. And this is the cycle that I recommend. It's from the book, The Inspire Model. And we've talked through each of those stages. So I don't need to tell you about that again. But thinking again, negotiation happens when we've made a proposal and we're following up with the customer. That's when they might say, well, how much is it? Or what flexibility have you got? Or they might start to negotiate. And we'll talk about how to handle those negotiating conversations. But of course, negotiations is not just for business, right? Negotiations are really useful in your life. And I love this quote that in business, as in life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And negotiations really, it's a bit of an art. It's also something that we have to practice and learn because for most people, especially in cultures where perhaps there's there's a more reserved way of interacting with people, we tend not to like negotiating. We can find it very difficult. So let's get into some kind of practical tips for negotiating. So I've got 6 simple tips for negotiating. The first one is that very often when people are in a negotiation, they find themselves kind of caught off guard by someone who starts to negotiate. And my recommendation is always just make sure that as a business team or as a sales organization, you've taken some time to figure out if someone's going to start negotiating with us, what are the things that we're prepared to negotiate on? And if someone asks us for something, how do we make sure that we know how to respond? Okay, so being prepared is really important. And then when someone's negotiating with you, the other thing I notice very often, I noticed it originally myself before I was trained on negotiations, was that because people feel uncomfortable negotiating, they tend to want to get that phase of the deal over with as quickly as possible. So they just feel really flustered, really awkward, so they'll just agree to something. And my advice and the advice I was given when I was trained was to do the opposite, was to take your time, pause, take a breath, regroup and be comfortable in a negotiating conversation. And it sounds strange because it's really difficult to do initially, but once you tell yourself that and you can learn to be comfortable in a negotiation, surprising how that changes the dynamic of the conversation that you're having with a customer or client. And then when someone is negotiating with you, one of the things that we tend to do, I've noticed this a lot, used to notice it myself, we used to someone would ask for something like a major discount. Well, can you give me this amount off, or can you reduce by that amount? And because we tend to be quite polite, we don't respond or react to that. We kind of pull a face, oh, let me think about it. And actually, what professional negotiators are trained to do is the opposite. They show a reaction. So if somebody asks for a discount, you'll notice that they respond. They might pull a strange face. They might flinch, or they might kind of short, sharp intake of breath, but they show a reaction. And the reason they show a reaction is because that reaction switches the pressure from the person who's asked. So the person who's asking for a discount puts pressure on you. When you react, you switch the pressure back. And it's a really interesting phenomenon that happens when you demonstrate a reaction. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that shortly. And then the third principle is thinking about when you are negotiating, very often people try to bring it down to like a binary thing, which is price. And actually, we shouldn't just allow ourselves to be drawn on the price. We should start to focus on the outcome that we create with that solution that we're offering, and of course, the value that that creates. So how much value does your product bring to that customer? Because very often the value is higher than the price. And if the value is higher than the price, we have to be really clear on focusing our efforts and focusing attention back onto that outcome or value that we create. And then fourth is thinking broader. So whenever you're negotiating, or whenever someone's trying to negotiate with you, they'll generally be negotiating on price. And what we should be prepared for in advance is all of the different elements or points that are available to be negotiated. So price might be one thing, but there's lots of other things that you could be negotiating on. And I've got a list of different elements of that in a second that I'll share with you. But listing the points of negotiation in advance, so that when someone says, okay, what's the best price you can do? You can then start to say, well, here are the different things that are valuable for us. If we can talk about those, then we can link that to the price, So you're prepared for that negotiation. And of course, that then creates this environment where instead of feeling as if you're just having to give discount or give a reduction, actually we start to think about negotiations as trading. I'm trading value rather than feeling as if I'm giving. And it may not always be price. It might be, your customer wants time, or they want additional services from you for free, or they want other things that as you're being asked for them, you think, that it feels a little bit like I'm constantly having to give something, and we should always be trading. So trading value. And then the final thing, of course, is to aim for a win-win. At the end of a negotiation, if you feel like you've been, how hard done by, or you haven't had value, that's not really a win for you and the customer. And by the same token, if the customer doesn't feel like they've had value, that's not a win for you and for them. So we really want to try and get to a position where the customer feels like, yeah, that was a good, fair deal. I kind of got a win. And you want to feel as if you had value from the conversation and you had a win as well, because that's how we create longer term sustainable relationships with clients that work for you and work for them. So really, really important we get that win-win element. And I was introduced to this framework. It wasn't exactly like this. I developed this myself because I wanted to create a visual that made sense. I think about this negotiating framework. When we're negotiating, we think about requests and we think about trades or gives, things that we might have to trade with the customer. And when we're thinking about that, we should be thinking about things that we are going to ask from the customer should have high value to you and your business, and they should have relatively low cost to your client. Okay. And then when we think about the things that we're prepared to trade, they should be things that have high value to the client and low cost to us. And so we have this, it's very difficult to get at either end of this spectrum, but you can start to work out actually what are those tradables and variables in the negotiating process that allow us to kind of meet at a point where we both feel as if we're getting high value from this negotiation or from the items that we're trading. And so starting to think about what are the requests and trades that you could use with your clients. I've got some examples. So we have this, when we run our sales training programs, we have this Inspire Sales Toolkit with all of the different documents and links and workbooks that we use. And on the proposal stage, we have this negotiation framework, and we have a list of example things that you could be requesting or trading with clients. So you can see, client might be asking for discount or a free trial or additional stock or extra training days or event sponsorship or all of that. You see there's a big list there. And the things that we should be asking for, maybe extended contract terms, maybe a volume commitment, maybe a full conversion, a commitment to a maximum amount of product or services, maybe order schedules. When I was doing key account management, we used to have a process where we negotiated for vendor managed inventory, where we had full visibility and control of our distributors' stock holdings for our products, so we could manage the stock ourselves and have real visibility of volumes and ROI and stuff. You might ask for testimonials from the customer, maybe network referrals to people in their network, maybe access to different departments in their business for either training or further development. But you've got lots of different things that sometimes we don't always consider as we go into negotiation phases with customers. And having these listed out in advance and agreed as a business team can be really effective, because then when you get to negotiations, you can start to formalize some of these commitments between you and your customer, and that is almost like a recognition of their commitment, and also recognition of the maybe any discounting that you might be doing in response to these trades and requests. So I'll share those with you as documents after today's session. There's quite a good list there, and a lot of our clients tend to pick these up and use them in key account negotiations. So then we've got the next kind of level. I like to think about it as kind of going that stage deeper in terms of how we manage ourselves through negotiations. And I think about them as negotiation, like mastering negotiations. So there's 6 mastery principles for negotiating. And these 6 items that I'll just walk you through now through the slides. One's called the professional flinch. And I'll share a personal story with you about that. Then there's this key negotiating phrase. Then there's a principle called price anchoring, and that links nicely to pricing increments. And then there's this final piece, which is deferring to a higher power, and you'll know immediately what that is, and the power question that I share as well. So let's just walk through those 6, and then we'll take a breath. So the professional flinch is a flinch that you can practice over and over until it becomes authentic. And the whole idea is that you recoil, scrunch your face, close your eyes, make a noise as you draw breath through your teeth, something like really. And it's interesting because I've worked with a lot of big B2B companies, and a lot of their procurement teams are taught specifically to flinch. And believe it or not, they're taught to flinch. And we don't, as salespeople, we don't always realize that procurement professionals are taught these principles. The reason we can use it, or the way we can use it as sales professionals, is if someone makes an unreasonable request, or if someone's negotiating position is too extreme, or you're asked for something actually you don't want to give, and you need to negotiate, or you need to generate your own negotiating leverage. So lots of times when this is really useful, and I would say it's predicated on having a good relationship. So remember where we are in the process of selling. You've established a really good relationship, you've created value, you've understood the customer's needs, you've presented a solution that they are very keen on, you're talking about next steps, and this is the negotiating phase. So remembering that the context here is really important. You have a customer that wants what you are able to provide, and this is about being able to utilize and leverage your negotiating position. And actually, when you do this with a smile on your face as well, it can actually create stronger connection with the customer. And I remember my first experience. I went on it was called the Complete Skilled Negotiator course, and it was 3 days in the Cotswolds, non-stop negotiation for 3 days, and they taught us this professional flinch. And every role play, we had to do the professional flinch. We did it over and over and over again. I got really practiced at it, and I got home on the Friday night, and I was due to go on holiday on the Monday with my family. And we had this iPad that the kids were using, and they always argued over the iPad. And my wife said, "What we need is one of those headphone splitters." So I went to the local electrical superstore place to buy a headphone splitter. And I went up to the counter, in my mind, they'd said on the negotiating course, over the next few weeks, just practice negotiating everywhere, practice the professional flinch in every situation. So I walk up to the counter, and I say to the guy behind the counter, I said, I'm after a headphone splitter, a splitter that takes a single headphone jack out into 2. He said, "Oh, yeah, we've got one of those. Hold on a sec." And he goes down into the counter, pulls it out from behind the counter. He says, "Yeah, something like that." I said, "Oh, yes, perfect. Yeah." I said, "How much is that?" And as he went to tell me the price, I automatically flinched because I thought I'm gonna flinch and see what happens. So I flinched before he actually said the price, and then he said, "It's £2.56." So I flinched. He said £2.56, and as I was flinching, I was thinking, "Oh, that sounds quite reasonable." But it was too late. I'd already committed. He then looked at me like really strange, as if to think, "What, you think £2.56 is a lot of money?" So he went, "Hold on a minute," went to his computer, clicked on the thing, and went, looked at me, looked at the computer, and went, "The best I could do is £2.22." So I said, "Oh, that sounds great, thanks." We were both a bit embarrassed. I paid my £2.22 and I left. And in fact, I've got a feeling I ordered two because I felt so guilty. I said, "I'll have two then at that price." So it's surprising how just that single action, you'd be really surprised at how effective that is in getting people to just reconsider what either their position or what they've presented to you. So it definitely worth a try, but do it on higher values, otherwise it feels a bit daft. And then there's this phrase in negotiations, and this we were taught this on the course, and this has been further reinforced with other programs I've been on. There's this key negotiating phrase called "if you, then I." And if you start to use this in that negotiation phase, you say, "If you are able to do X, then I can look at Y." What it does is it helps you to feel like you're in the driving seat in negotiations. You have to know what you want to negotiate in order for this to work, of course, but it does at an unconscious level. It gives you a sense of control, gives your customer a sense that you are in control and that you know what you're asking for. And once you've made your kind of statement, "if you, then I," and then you learn to use silence afterwards, it's really powerful because the customer tends to feel led and they're much more likely and willing to kind of go along with your suggestion. And as you keep using this throughout your negotiation phase, we were taught to keep using this in every stage of negotiation. It's really effective. And it look, really simply, it's kind of, well, if you're able to, here's an example, well, if you're able to extend the contract for a second year or a third year, then I may be able to look at another 2.5% discount on the price. But it makes the two things conditional. So we're not ever feeling as if we're just having to give something. So as we think about trading, this is a really effective way to manage that part of the trading of value. And then, of course, we start to think about price anchoring. And you might have heard of price anchoring before, but how we use it is that we state a price, and they often say that the person that states the price first tends to win or get the higher value. So stating your price confidently and then anchoring to the price. And then that means restating your price over and over again. And when you're restating the price, it unconsciously anchors both you and the customer to your price, not the price or the discount they're trying to get. And even if you're discounting, you should state the price, then the discount. So if somebody says, "Well, what's the best price you can do on that?" And you are prepared to do a discount, you say, "Well, as you know, our price is," mention the price, and any discount is a reduction from that price, but you keep anchoring to your original price. And of course, we want to reinforce about the quality and the value that we're creating. Or we might say, how close can you get to this price? And certainly as part of the sales process, we certainly want to keep reciting and reminding the client of the needs they said they had and the way that we can satisfy them. And that as a principle is really effective as well, just kind of almost socializing your price with the client and maintaining a focus on it helps them to stay at the right level. And then of course, linked to price anchoring, so we want to be anchoring to the right price, then we've got pricing increments. And if you think about it, we live in a world where everything's really fast paced, people want things now. We're also conditioned to round up and down to even numbers. We tend to want quick resolutions to difficult, uncomfortable conversations and situations. And we read other people's minds, I think, quite badly when we're negotiating. And because we don't like the discomfort, we tend to do a couple of things. We move too fast and we discount too much and lose value. And instead, we should be moving more slowly in smaller increments and staying credible. And I have a really recent example of this. I've just managed to negotiate to sell the house that I live in. My wife and I are going to move at some point. We haven't found somewhere to go to yet. We're negotiating, or we were negotiating on the price of our house. And my house was on the market. I won't talk the actual numbers, but my house was on the market. The estate agent came round. They said, we've got an interested buyer. So the buyer came round, and I made sure I was here for that buyer visit because we've done a lot of work on the house and I know what that work entailed. So I was able to explain that to the buyer. And the last thing that happened as the couple were leaving the house was that the wife said to the husband in front of me and the estate agent, said, well, because they'd sold their house, well, we've got two people interested in our house, and if we have to take a lower offer to secure this house so that someone else doesn't get it, I think we should do that. And she said that just before she left the room, just before she left the house. So I knew that actually they were very motivated to buy the house. And then the next day they came in with an offer that was 30,000 under the price that the house was on the market for. So I said to the estate agent, absolutely not. No, we're not in a position to take that offer. Just to say no. I didn't renegotiate at that point. So then they came back the next day with an offer that was 20,000 under, and they said, that's our best and final. I said, no. And then they came back the third day and they said, right, this is it now, 10,000 less. It's our final offer. We can't go any higher. We don't have the budget. So the estate agent's saying to me, look, you should try this. You should take this offer in this market. 10,000 under is a really good price. We, on average, people are dropping 20, 25,000. My wife was saying we should take the offer, we should do it. So I said to the estate agent, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go back to the buyer and say to him, I want you to use these exact terms. Say, Mr. Lee was expecting to get market price, right? And he wants the full price of the market that his house is on the market for. However, he understands your position. They're in a really strong position. They've got a first-time buyer for their house, and he appreciates that you can move as quickly or as slowly as he wants, and that has value to him. But he wants to sell the house for another £2,000. So I want another £2,000. And if you can add £2,000 to your offer, Mr. Lee will take it off the market and agree the deal. Okay. And then I said to the estate agent, so say that to him, but also say to him, don't make a decision now. Think about it overnight and call him the next morning. And the estate agent rang me straight back and said, oh, he said no to that. I said, but you told him to think about it overnight, did you? He said, yeah, I did. I said, right, okay. He might have said no now, ring him back in the morning. Anyway, I knew what would happen overnight, that his wife would say to him, if you let this house go for £2,000, I'm going to kill you. And that is exactly what happened. So the next day when he phoned him, he said, yeah, I thought about it overnight. Yeah, we don't want to let it go for another £2,000. And so we ended up with a price that is completely odd and unround, right? So it's £2,000 doesn't sound like a lot when you put it in the size and scheme of the sale of a house. But if you were offered £2,000 in cash, would you say, oh, no, it's all right, I'm just going to leave it on the table? And these are things we do in business deals without even realizing. Sometimes the increment, we get to a position and actually small incremental amounts can make such a difference. That when you get into a negotiation phase and you think about the impact that has on a business P&L, the price that you're able to negotiate and leverage, actually it's almost all profit when you get to that stage, because you are now negotiating for what is the price of that deal. So I thought I'd share that as a personal story. Next time you're selling a house or a car, just make sure that you hold your position, watch for the buying signals, and take your time and slow things down. And then the final couple of things, so deferring to a higher power. Sometimes the client genuinely wants more than you can give, and you don't have authority. So you do this if you think the client's asking for something, you don't have perhaps authority to go that far. Perhaps you're thinking, yeah, I think my boss might sign this off, but I need to talk to him. If the client's asking for too much, then at times you have to walk away, right? There are times when you have to walk away from a bad deal. And so what I recommend is that we say, I can't commit to that today. I need to speak to my manager or someone else in the business. And interestingly, what happens when you do this is it buys you time, of course. Two, it demonstrates your commitment to want to still do a deal with that customer, but it also relieves the pressure for you and for them, because sometimes the customer feels like they get themselves stuck in a position where they've asked for something and they have to follow through on that. And when you say, I need to speak to my boss, I'll come back to you in 24 hours, you give that client thinking time. And I've done this lots of times. And what happens is the client overnight, the clients think to themselves, maybe it is a good deal. Maybe I should accept this offer. And once you're clear on the timeline for the client deciding, you have to make sure that you know when does the client need a decision by, to make sure that or when do you agree you're going to have a decision made. sense check the request with someone internally, and then respond to the client. And often the client will have shifted their position in that 24-hour period. It's quite amazing how often that happens. So deferring to a higher power is quite a nice tactic when you're perhaps in a position where you can't quite get the deal across the line there and then. But the important bit is having the next conversation diarised and scheduled so that you can then follow up and get agreement. And then the final piece I want to just talk about is this. They call it the negotiating power question. And I don't know if anybody's ever read the book Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss and Tal Raz, but Chris Voss is a hostage negotiator. So he set up the FBI's hostage negotiation department in the US. And the book's called Never Split the Difference because, of course, when you're negotiating for hostages, you can't split the difference. You can't say, well, you keep so many, I'll take so many. You have to be able to get everybody out in one piece. And it's really interesting. He talks about lots of principles in the book, really good psychological principles in negotiations. But one of the fundamental things he talks about is this question that when you're in a position where someone's negotiating with you and you're not sure where to go next, you simply ask this question. And the question is, how am I supposed to do that? And when you ask the question, how am I supposed to do that? And I've done this a few times with clients, what happens is they start negotiating with themselves. It's a really weird thing that happens. So psychologically, that person then has to feel like they have to justify their position. And they kind of say, well, couldn't you do this? Or couldn't you do that? Or shouldn't you do this? And for each of those, you can just say, that's still not possible. How am I supposed to do that? And it ends up with a client very often just backing down and saying, okay, let's just go ahead with what you've proposed. It's really, really fascinating. So I'd love for you to try some of these techniques and principles today because I've used all of them at different stages and they're really, really effective. Okay. And then I'll send these slides to you afterwards if you want to use this. Just think that hopefully you've got some key takeaways from today. There's 6 negotiating kind of principles for mastery. There are 6 ideas around tips for negotiating. So 12 things, and I'd love for you to think about what your key takeaways are from this session, and I'll give you a chance to do that in a second. So final thing, this from Lee Steinberg, I'd like to add that negotiating is not something to be avoided or feared. It can be and should be an everyday part of life. There's an argument that we're always negotiating with someone for something. I have a wife. I feel like we negotiate a lot. I've got 2 grown-up children. They negotiate with me incredibly well, so I have to be able to use my negotiation skills. I'm constantly working with clients, so I like to work. I love the negotiation phase of any discussion. And if you can start to get this positive association with negotiating, it's surprising how effective it is in all areas and elements of your life. So really start to lean into negotiations. Okay, so I've been talking now for about 35 minutes. So I'm just going to pause and give you a chance to capture your key actions that you want to focus on from this workshop. Hopefully there's some insights and light bulb moments for you as we've gone through this session. And then I'd love to hear in the chat, or if anybody wants to come off mute, I'd love for you to just share with me what your key takeaways are. Joe's already in the chat. Thank you, Joe. Joe says, so she said, lots actually. Loving the flinch. Joe likes the flinch. Good. Okay. Kevin's left. So then Joe said, I know Justin said go home early, but it probably meant after this session. Yeah, I did actually. So you're absolutely right, Joe. So Joe says it's about extending my comfort zone. Wonderful advice. Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, very often the biggest challenge we have with negotiating is managing ourselves and being comfortable in that moment, because it can feel really awkward whenever my wife and I are in a situation. So we over the years we've bought different things like furniture from shops and cars from car dealerships, and whenever we sit down to do the paperwork, she always says to me, right, I'm quite happy to fill out the forms, but if you're going to start negotiating, I'm going. And I just say fine. So she gets up and has a walk around the showroom, and you can see the salesperson going, where does she go? Because she's so uncomfortable, she will just say yes. Just sign it. And I really enjoy the negotiations. So I'll start to say I just love it. I'll talk about whether it's interest-free payments and how much is the interest free, and if it's genuinely interest-free, right? If they say, well, it's not, I say, well, how much if I'm going to pay for it up front? And if they're then prepared to discount it, it's not interest-free. But if it really is interest-free, then I'll take the interest-free. So I love to wheedle out those details because there's value there that you can create. Anyway, so Kirsty says, I need to work through my conversational strategy in the steps you've outlined. Oh, nice. Thanks, Kirsty. I also need to buy and read the book. Yeah, the Inspire, Influence, Sell book, honestly, is really, really useful. And then if you want to go super detailed on negotiations, then Never Split the Difference is a really good follow-up read specifically for negotiations. But that doesn't really talk about sales and the sales process. Really, we want to think about where negotiation fits with sales. Lottie says the book is amazing. I hope you mean my book, Lottie, but if you mean both, I don't mind. But thank you very much, Lottie. I love that comment. Thank you. And then Joe said, Joe, well done. Oh yes, Lottie does mean my book. Thank you, Lottie. I spent a lot of time on it, and genuinely, I hope it is everything that you would like it to be. Joe says key actions: slow down, plan the points of negotiation, take 24 hours if necessary. And she said, I've already downloaded the Audible Never Split the Difference. Brilliant. You will love that as well. Thanks, Joe. Excellent actions. Probably actions for everybody, I would think. Slow down, plan the points of negotiation, take 24 hours if necessary. Remember to flinch. I added that last one. Remember to flinch. Good. Anybody else? Would anybody else like to share? Anybody else want to come off mute and share what you're thinking? Share your feedback? Anyone feeling brave? I'm just waiting for someone to come off mute. David, thanks, David. Hi, Justin. I'm relatively new to sales. Thanks, David. I feel that the important key takeaway from this session is to slow things down. The temptation for me is to get down to the pitch too soon. Yes, it is. Yeah, and that is very, very common, David. Not just for people who are new to sales, actually, and it's a real temptation that you have to build up some discipline to resist that temptation, I have to say. And I think so. I had a situation about a year ago where I was in a discussion with a sales director to do some work with her team. And then there was this event coming up. She said, oh, could we meet at this event? Because I'd like to introduce you to our managing director. I said, yeah, of course. Yes. So I was at the event. She was going to be at the event anyway. And we met like at midday. I went over to see her, kind of had a quick catch up, and then she said, oh, let me introduce you to our managing director, Lisa. So then she introduced me to Lisa, and she said, so she then teed me up. She said, Justin, tell Lisa all about your program. So I kind of went, okay. So I started, and then I saw this lady, I saw the managing director's eyes start to glaze over. And I was like, shit, I've been drawn into pitching when she knows nothing about me, nothing about my business, and I know nothing about her experience. So I, thankfully, only a couple of minutes in, caught myself and went, actually, Lisa, let me just pause for a minute. Before I do that, can I just ask you, and just ask her, can you tell me a bit about your role in the business and what you see needs to happen through like a sales training and coaching program with your teams? And then she said, well, I'm glad you asked that because Christine and I have different views on this. I was like, and that just unlocked the opportunity. And we have to remember that, and that, to your point, David, that temptation to pitch can sometimes be our undoing if we don't pause and give ourselves the mental space to ask the right questions, let the customer open up. And I always think about it, every time we have a new stakeholder from a customer coming on board, we have to resell that new stakeholder. They are not automatically brought up to speed by someone else in that business. It doesn't happen. So we have to resell that person. By reselling, I mean understand their needs, get them on the journey, understand why this is important to them, then talk about the solution linked to that. So it's really important that we get that part right as well. Good. Thank you, David. Excellent. So we've got 8 minutes left. I've got a couple of things I want to share with you. Thank you, everyone, for the feedback, and thanks for joining and staying on so long. I'd love at some point to take, before we close the session, I'd love to take a quick selfie of the group. I don't know if people who can come on camera will come on camera, if you don't mind, but I'll do that in a couple of minutes. So I'll just give you a bit of warning in case you need to do the makeup or straighten your hair or put your collar to one side, whatever. Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of minutes, and then we'll do that as a final closing thing, if that's all right with everybody. So let's talk. Let me share my screen. I think am I still sharing my screen? Can you still see my screen? Yeah, cool. Okay. So just want to talk to you about our sales academies. A few of you on the call are already in our sales academy, so thank you for joining today's session as well. I want to talk a little bit about our sales academy. So we run these sales workshops where the starting point is to take what we call our sales acceleration scorecard. So you take it; it's like a diagnostic scorecard test, and then you're able to just get a personal development plan and some recommendations around where to focus. We then start this 12-month like academy learning timeline where you get access to all of the Inspire Influence Sell resources, and then you get access to our monthly Sales Mastermind web classes, which are live 90-minute sessions, and a private WhatsApp group, and an online program with a series of individual different video-based content sessions where you go through all of the stages of the sales process and just work through those alongside the live workshops. And it's a really useful opportunity to kind of get involved in a group where, as a group, what we're trying to do is create confidentiality so you can have confidential conversations about what's happening in your business. There's a real community builds as part of the people that attend each month. We're collaborating and sharing ideas, sharing challenges, and also having a bit of challenge to the ideas and thoughts that you might have around what you're doing right now in sales. And of course, making a commitment to implement some of the changes so that it actually works with you and your business. This sales acceleration scorecard I mentioned is here. It'll be in the slide. So if you want to look at that and you can start with that here and now. You don't have to be on the program. That's a free resource. So that will give you an opportunity to look at where you might want to focus. And then if you want to start your journey yourself, then you can get a copy of the book. The book's a really good starting point, as Lottie says. Thank you, Lottie. And if you would like to join the Sales Mastermind, then feel free to contact me after today's session. I will also offer, if anybody would like a kind of one-to-one session to talk about what's going on for you in your business, this is it's like the discovery call links. So let me just share that with you as well. If anybody would like to book a one-to-one, this is an open invitation to do that. And if you have some specific things you want to talk about, then I'm happy to pick those up with you offline. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to go to the selfie now, if everyone's okay. If you can come on camera, I'd love it if you came on camera. I'm just going to give you a moment to come on camera if you can. And then, thank you, everybody. Oh, look at that. Thank you. And I'm going to give you a countdown so that you know when I'm taking it, so I don't catch you off guard, because of course that's important, isn't it? You want to look your best for the photo. So I'll give you a 3, 2, 1, and then I'll take the image. Okay, ready? So 3, 2, 1. Oh, look at that. You all look absolutely wonderful. Thank you. Brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are going to wrap up now. But before we wrap up, we've got 4 minutes. If anybody has like a question that's burning, or there's something you want to kind of ask, or something you want to share, then this is your moment in the spotlight. Is there anything you'd like to share? Anybody would like to share anything or ask anything? You can ask anything. Doesn't even have to be related to sales.
Anybody having a barbecue later today?
Nice, Lottie. Anybody having a barbecue later today?
It's
Is there?
20 degrees where I am, so we're having a barbecue.
Oh, nice. Lottie, remind me where you are.
I'm near Bristol.
Bristol. Oh, south, you see. South.
Yeah.
Nice and warm. Yeah, it's 20 degrees here. I'm not having a barbecue today, unfortunately, but I may have one tomorrow, just because you've prompted me. How about
Got to
that?
take advantage of this weather. We don't know when it's going to go.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it? It's wonderful. I think it's going to be all right for the weekend. Then it tails off. I think. That's the plan. Fingers crossed. Thanks, Lottie. Anybody else? Any more for any more? Any other questions from anybody? Barbecue related or otherwise? No? What are you having on your barbecue, Lottie, before we finish?
I have no idea. I've left it
Ah,
in the hands of my partner and his brother. So
Meat feast. It is there.
Potentially potentially just bread rolls. I'm
Yeah.
not sure. I
No.
don't know why I've left it to them, but
There'll be a lot of meat. You basically just you're gonna have a meat dinner.
oh,
Lottie. Hope you're not planning on going vegetarian anytime soon.
nope.
Well, whatever you're doing, have a wonderful weekend, and I hope the weather holds for you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the session. Hope you've got a lot of value and some key takeaways that you can use and work through in your business. So have a wonderful weekend, everybody. Feel free, if you do want to check in with me, feel free to let me know. I'll send you the slides. I'll send you the recording of the video for this session and the couple of workbooks that I mentioned as well. So you'll get all of that as a follow-up from today. So have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy some sunshine if it's warm where you are. Thank you, everybody, and I look forward to catching up with you all soon. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Justin, have a great weekend.
Thank you. Cheers, Lottie. Thanks, everyone. Take
Bye.
care. See you.